In Shemot Bet Pasuk Kaf Gimel, it says, Vayehi bayamim harabim hahem v'yamad melech Mitzrayim. A long time after that, the king of Egypt died. V'yanchu v'nei Yisrael min ha'avodah. The Israelites were groaning under the bondage. Vayizaku, and they cried out. V'ta'al shavatam el ha'elohim min ha'avodah. And their cry for help from the bondage rose up to God. Several commentators note that there is a change from plural to singular, from vayizaku, and they cried out, v'ta'al, and the cry went up, v'ta'al shavatam. They note that this move from plural to singular is showing that at this time, the children of Israel were looking at each other as a unity. And this is why their cry went up to God. In other words, it was fighting each other. It was seeing each other as separate and in competition and opposition that got us into Egypt in the first place. And it is the unity of crying out together as one that opens the divine ears, kiviyachal, so to speak. A couple psukim later, it says, Vayar Elohim et bnei Yisrael, vayeda Elohim. And Rashi notes here, vayeda Elohim, on this pasuk that says, God looked upon the Israelites and God took notice of them. Rashi says, Natan aleihem lev v'lo he'elim einav. God placed his heart, his attention upon them and did not hide his eyes. When we think of how we validate a child or someone who is suffering, there are two things that are critical. One is the listening balev. It's really hearing with our hearts. And the other is giving them our eyes, giving them our attention. And these two things happen so critically here. And it's a huge shift, because before this, Bnei Israel were suffering deeply, but they did not feel God's presence, and they did not feel heard or seen. And so when they cry out in Pasuk 23, that leads to God's seeing and knowing of them in Pasuk 25, which wraps up that chapter. And the Mefarshim say that the seeing of God is God's recognizing the terrible brutality of slavery in terms of all the physical torture and difficulty. But the yeda, the knowing, is realizing the deep trauma, the trauma that extends through families and carries forward across generations. And God saw that as well. Our commentators speak here about the possibility of God hearing us even in the deepest depths of despair. And while we need to be cognizant of the miracle of God turning and hearing us, another piece that we need to recognize as also miraculous is that we continue, despite all of the suffering across our history, we continue to cry out to God. And that too is a miracle. At this moment, there is an extraordinary spike of terror going on in our society over the rise of the new variant spreading wildly. May we remember that God continues to hear us, and may we also use our voices in prayer to cry out to the divine. And may we also know that we are one as a community and feel held by that unity in this difficult time. May you be safe and well. May Hashem bless you and keep you healthy. And Shabbat Shalom.